This presentation actually is probably the most important presentation that I ever give. So it actually should start the day, and sometimes we end up not even giving it. But because we're such a visual, aesthetic kind of specialty when you're dealing with aesthetics, and our photographs are so pathetic. If you look at journals and look at before and afters that are sent to me and sent to you, it's behooves all of us to start taking better photos. The challenge, as you all understand, is that cameras don't take pictures. People take pictures. So I often have people say, well, what kind of camera do you have? And then actually, I have a Nikon camera. I have a 675, the newer one that has, and I have a 28-105 lens, a 28-125 lens. So I have lots of lenses, lots of cameras. But still, it's like injectables. It's not the product so much as it's the person, it's the painter. But let's show you how I do it. I have 5 nurses and I have 2 assistants. My assistants run my life. They coordinate all my flights, my meetings. They tell me when I can eat, when I can't eat. And one of my assistants I've trained now. She's taken several photography courses. I've trained her for 6 years. I have a dedicated camera room it's called a Rembrandt setup. I'll show you what a Rembrandt setup is like. So we take about 125 photos a day. And if you look at this image, this is a recent National Geographic photographic winner. So if you go to Google and type in, okay, National Geographic winners for 2016, there's several categories. And if you read the literature and say, what's the number one criteria for a good National Geographic photography winner? What do you think it is? You're wrong. It's not technique. It's a compelling image. So if you have a compelling before and after photo, you don't even read the text. It just catches your eye. That everything is just really so compelling, you really like to look at it. So if your images aren't compelling, then it's important to relook at what you're doing, because they make a rather bold statement. And you can take pictures with almost anything. I took that photo with my iPhone this morning. So how did I do that? With an iPhone? I have a filter and a little aftermarket way that I took the photo. So you can take that beautiful photo that I took at 6:15 this morning with an iPhone, and yet most of the time you have to have a much better camera. So there's not a lot of principles to compelling photos. You have to understand that there's guidelines but not rules. So some of the guidelines involve the light setting. This ISO setting, that's probably the most expensive part of your camera, is understanding how important that light is. So that image sensor is probably the most important thing we have. And in patients that have different photo skin types, you have to learn to adjust that. In my system, everything is manual except for the focus. So even the white balance we play with a little bit and record. So generally that ISO is really important, of course, and the aperture setting, the shutter speed, I keep at 125. That's fairly fixed, but everything else is fairly manual. And anybody who wants part of this type of presentation, you just email Bob Rouleau, and then he can send it to me, and I can send you some of the concepts there. But if you know your stops, then it becomes even easier, even taking the best photographs outdoors and of family pictures and portraits. And that's a good slide to kind of copy. And generally, we keep our ISO at 40, 400, and our aperture setting anywhere from 11 to 13, depends on the skin color. And try to keep it fairly simple. But now with skin of color patients, instead of playing around a lot with the aperture opening, we'll often just move the patient closer or further away from the camera as a nice little trick of how to do that and how to get the light just right. And so most of the time you can take really good photographs of patients with skin of color, depends on your setting. Now there's a term that I use called psychophotology. And psychophotology you'll all relate to because we all have these patients. So only about 10% of our patients own their photo that are just great at having their, and most are posers, and some they just pull back, and others are impossible. They're just they're photo avoidance syndrome. So this 10% that own it are really fantastic to take pictures of because they just know how to create the look we want. As I mentioned earlier, I have a nurse assigned to every patient, so that nurse goes with the patient to the photo room. Every consult gets a photo taken, 10 photos, minimum 10 photos, and they act as their coach because they don't know what it means to grimace or to pull their mouth corners down. They have to have somebody that can mime them and sort of mimic them a little bit. So this girl is a patient of mine, a family physician, and she poses, but she just doesn't particularly like her photo. But this is a typical pose photo. And then about 60% of these patients that you can photograph emotion without animation. So if you look at her eyes, she can say, "My mother made me come here. I don't care about my scars. I don't want to be here." So this is just a typical negative kind of photograph that's a pullback, diminished kind of thing. And then once you get this patient treated and her scars pretty well eliminated, then look at her eyes. She has that typical smize in her eyes. She's got the smile, twinkle in her eyes. She like her photo taken here on the right? Absolutely. So it's those kind of patients are a little bit difficult. So how to create life in the lifeless is sometimes difficult because this patient, to create this patient as a working, she now is a great patient, but I had to peel off the onion and peel it off in layers and finally get her to get away from this PAS syndrome, the photo avoidance syndrome. That fits a lot of our patients where they're really difficult to take photos. So number 2 kind of guideline is get rid of all the shadows. So you want to remove makeup, of course, and get rid of the bands and get rid of the fun furs and the sweaters, and so you can have proper light. So you want to if you look at this girl, see on her left, she's got the fun fur and her hair all down. You can't see the details. So if you look on the right, suddenly you can. All I've done, I haven't changed the light at all. All we've done is just taken the stuff around her face. So now you can see contour and shape. Because these photos, and we see these a lot of clinical photos, like on the left here, and it just doesn't look good. You can't see the details. So this is for my clinic I've used for years. And it's probably the best if you're into making any kind of money, if that's part of your profession, then this probably makes me more money than anything else I do, is scan the patient's photo once they bring it in. Because a patient that leaves at 60 that wants to look better, that brings her 25-year-old photo, she goes through and tries to find the photo. What does she do? She holds the photo in the mirror and says, what's happening to my face? And intelligent patients, they get involved in your project because they sort of start understanding that scanned photo is going to have some meaning. And I'll show you a little bit how we do that. So how do we use our photos? I mean, we use them the same way you do. So teaching other patients, teaching physicians, brochures, your website, all those things you can think of, putting them on YouTube, however. Now the lens, I'm always surprised at some of the lenses that our clinician colleagues use because the lens is probably as important as the camera. So I'm not particularly fond of prime lenses. You can use them. The reason I like the 28-105 lens is even though I use it mostly at a 50 millimeter length with our distance, it's so useful for doing closer images, and it's a really, really nice lens. So this lens, most companies make that lens. So if you look at the photo on the top left, all these are exactly the same girl. Same girl, same camera room, same camera, just different lenses. So the image you can see is pretty remarkably different. She goes from beautiful to being ugly with just the lens. And the problem is the cameras don't lie, right? I mean, what you see is reality. People think that what they see is real. Their perception and perception of reality and reality are often different. But they accept the photos. Your brain accepts it as a true image. That's one of the challenges with photographs. So that's the same scenario. You go from an 85 millimeter sort of steady to an 8-1, and you go from the good, bad, and the ugly kind of thing. But either way, your brain automatically reconstructs the image that you see as being reality. So here's my basic setup. It's called you can look this up on Google. It's called Rembrandt setup. It's a way to avoid shadows. So instead of using 2 soft boxes and 2 reflectors, I use 1 large soft box and the reflector, and then the camera system is on a tripod kind of system, so it's fixed. And the background we use now is quite neat. It's actually sold by a group in New York that makes this backdrop. And this backdrop, in fact, I'm having it as we speak. I'm having my whole wall on the back painted the same mottled color. And that background, this one, exact one here, is a really nice background for taking photos of the new era of clinical photography rather than white or blue or green or black. It gives a really nice backdrop. So here's some of the almost next to rules. Every camera has a focusing part of the lens. And it used to be there was just one little box. Now you can, of course, adjust it to having the whole face focused. But generally you want the nose to be lined up with the ear lobe. And every 3/4 view, the nose is lined up with the side of the cheek. So when you've got the 3/4 view, you want to have that focusing frame for sure if you're limiting your focus to the lateral zygoma on each side. And make sure that's lined up. There's a few positions that you can't change after market when you're trying to adjust your photos, and I'll show you how important that becomes. So that 3/4 view, to be consistent, the bottom of the nose with the middle of the earlobe is about right. And make sure, these aren't lines in the camera. These are lines I've drawn after just to be consistent. The profile is often the more difficult to be consistent. What I usually do is make sure you can see a little bit of the eyelash on the opposite side of the eye, even if they're using Latisse. You want to see that opposite side. And again, the nose lined up with the earlobe. And then it becomes fairly predictable. And the focusing frame on the zygoma. And see that eyelash on the other side. That's a really useful hint. And we talked about this before. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but when you do split faces, and if any of you want to know how to do that, I'll be glad to send you a little way. You can send it to Bob, and he can send it to me. In fact, he may have that already because I've done this quite a bit on how to do these split faces. But they're very impressive for patients because it's one of the ways of converting patients to look at the whole face instead of having monofocus. So if you get away from that monofocus, then you can treat the whole face. And we talked about this a bit, that we've never seen ourselves except in a camera or except in a lens type of thing, a photography setup or a mirror. And so mirrors have been around a long time. So this girl that I showed you was the pose girl from the GP girl that wanted to look better, but she has a terrible self-image. So what she sees in the mirror is this. So when she looks in the mirror, that's kind of what she sees. She sees ugly. She won't look in the mirror. In fact, I wouldn't treat this girl. I don't treat these patients. So patients that will not look in the mirror, I do not treat. So, and we can go into that in a little bit of detail, but I've had some real issues. In fact, I have 2 plastic surgeons I teach with in Canada that are the exact same way. They do not treat patients that won't look in the mirror. Because how are you going to determine outcome if they have no visual perception? So again, this is really important. This girl has got a great result, but she doesn't like it because she sees herself like that. So, and I hate to bring this up twice, but it's really a useful trick is to send her the photograph of the mirror picture rather than the photograph, the mirror image. And she loved it. So you have to have a photographic coach, and that makes a big difference. Now, here's probably the most important lesson of the day. You've got an original photo, and it's not quite straight. So you make sure when you take photos, you have enough room around the image, around your portrait, around your face, so you could make adjustments in your cropping. So in your straightening out the photo, you can actually make the adjustment because this is a little bit off. So you could actually then make the adjustment. You can straighten it, and then you can crop it to where you want. So that's all perfectly legitimate. So this is aeronautical type of term. So these are the things you cannot adjust with your aftermarket camera system. So in an airplane, if you yaw, you do this. You go this way. So if you take a photo, and I'll show you what that means. And if you pitch, the pitch up is like that. We see a lot of photos like this and a lot like this. Or you roll your head to one side, roll left or roll right. Those you can't change. So yaw, pitch, and roll you can't change. So let's show you some examples. So that's a great photo because she's lined up correctly. So here she's got a pitch up where her chin's up. So no matter how you adjust that, you can't change that with your aftermarket setting to change it for printing off or brochures or for your website. So this is pitched down. So you can't change that. Okay? So in this one's rolled to the right, so you can't change that. So you try to flip it and it just doesn't work. So you get a patient like that, flips to the left, then that's roll left. So this is yaw. So you tilt the whole body to one side, and this is yaw the other way. So as you lean that way, then you can't straighten that out with the camera. The one ear is off, the opposite ear it doesn't come into view. So those are important to understand. So this is a typical example of what we see when you can photograph patients that have emotion and no emotion. So here we've got this girl that's devastated by her basal cell carcinoma on her nose and had Mohs. So she's got this scar. She went from a classy, confident girl to no confidence, lost her job, became reclusive. So, and is a teeth grinder, breaking teeth. She's not a clencher, she's a teeth grinder. She doesn't have a temporalis muscle, so you know she's more of a grinder rather than a clencher. So when you're trying to photograph these patients, then once we improve the nose scar and improve her beauty a little bit, just a bit to get her enhanced, then all of a sudden she's got her confidence back. So you can photograph emotion without having much animation. So same girl said, well, I didn't have any idea you could fix collapsed nasal valves. So she stopped her exercising because every time she breathes in hard, she ends up collapsing her nose. So those are things you can record and fix and improve. We had some patients to work with today, but it just didn't work out. But this worm's eye view is the photograph you take for these nasal valves. So you take that photograph from underneath like a worm, and you duplicate that. So this patient, for instance, is inhaling through her nose, and this is immediately after with those 5-step procedure of how we treat the collapsed nasal valve. So those photographs become very important. When we're doing in Canada we call it Bell-Kyra, and you guys call it Kybella. So we just finished a photographic study for Allergan International, and trying to teach patients how to do all these, from repose to frown to scowl and chin up, away, all these things, from spontaneous smile to relax, kind of all these views we do. One of the hardest was to teach patients how to grimace. So I didn't have a coach for that. So then you do a photograph of somebody that's grimacing, and we keep that photograph in the room and say, this is a grimace. Can you grimace for us? So, and some patients can do that and some don't. But that's kind of the grimace kind of concept for your Kybella sort of baseline patients. So having youthful photos is really, really important. It helps you evaluate past balance, harmony, relevant symmetry or not. So you have those photos, as I said, bring in. So here's our patient that's 54, and we've already taken her set of 10 photos. So she brings in her photo when she's 27. So then you repeat the photo in exactly the same pose for legitimate type of record, so you can have the same pose to help identify those features you're trying to do, because that's the only photo she could find. So then we use that as her scan photo for her record and sort of see what's happening to genetics. Aging is terrible, isn't it? It's maturing process is not great. But see, this is what we do, and then the patients look at this, particularly because patients never really see their profile, and they look at that and they say, where do we start? So then you start. And same thing with this girl. She comes in at a 62-year-old. She's a very animated girl. Bring her photo when she's 23. And this whole dynamic discord we've been hammering and talking about the last few days to have you be more aware of how muscles overpower tissue resistance and bony remodeling and all that imbalance that happens with animation and out-animation. But you want to record that. So if you record that and have a print off for the patient, it's easy for them to see why they need to treat the whole face rather than chasing the nasolabial fold. So when they do that, it makes a big difference. So another patient, same thing. She's got that nice Duchenne smile. So you want to repeat that and just show them that intercanthal distance stays the same. So that measurement, so that's why you know the photographs are the same size, because you actually measure them and make sure the photos are lined up. And that palpebral fissure that narrows down, you can actually improve that. But you need to have record of it so you can show patients what they used to look like. So, and this smile makeover is a big, big feature of our aesthetic dentists, as it should be with us, to understand what muscles make the smile and how you create it's the hardest thing when you take a photograph and say smile. Well, patients don't know what a smile is. You have to sort of have a repertoire of dumb jokes that you can do to have spontaneous smile and a social smile and a commissurer smile. And like Joe Biden, his smirk, that's a smirk, and pose smile and these polite smiles. There's quite a variation of smiles. And we're going to go into this in great detail about, as Arthur already was showing, about the teeth and all those things that make a difference as you get more miles on us. So recording a smile is one of the more difficult things to do. And what we've done with neuromodulator, with Botox, is we went from that nice, years ago, called the Pan Am smile, the airline pilot, or airline kind of a smile, to now we're missing that because so many of our patients, many in the world, have had so much Botox in the periorbital area, they've lost their smile. They just smile from their mouth. And that's this commissurer smile and the social smile and the spontaneous smile. And that's kind of, some people just have a commissurer smile. They don't have a normal smile, but that's just their smile. So if you look at Julia Roberts, she has that nice, spontaneous kind of Duchenne smile. So the Duchenne smile, if you look it up and study this out a little bit about the French neurologist that originally described that, it's kind of an interesting story. But the Duchenne smile is of such interest and worldwide interest. There's even schools that train kids how to smile. It's actually a smile training school. You can take that course in how to smile. So this patient is typical of a lot of our patients that are in the late quadragenarian. She's about 50, and you can tell she's yelling that she's 50 because of her eyes. She's closing her eyes when she smiles. So what you can do is with neuromodulator and fillers, we've been trying to emphasize the last 2 days, you can actually modify that and still have our spontaneous smile, but subtly open up her eyes and raise the brows a little bit and modify it and still have a nice smile. So the narrowing of the palpebral fissure you can record photography-wise, and then treat that, and it makes it much better. So that's kind of our run through on basic photography 103.